Great. Thanks everyone for joining today. I think Alexandra, you're gonna kind of kick things off here.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us for part 2 of our fee negotiation series. We're excited to be co-hosting this event between the Boston Society of Architects Project Management Roundtable, which is represented by Tracy and Rosalind, the co-chairs, and the Illuminating Engineering Society Boston section. So we're delighted to have such a good crowd for this event. Part 2 of our series is focusing on fee negotiations between architects and their consultants. So we do have learning units available for this session before we kick off the content. So I'll let you know there's a link in the chat. So if you get AIA credits, please fill that out. And if you'd like to submit for any other kind of credit, please request an email certificate and we'll make sure you get that. So we have 4 learning objectives today. When you leave, you should be able to describe to the consultants their required scope and review contract documents to ensure that it's been captured properly. I want you to be able to understand the impact of project schedule and changes in timeline and what that might do to the fee. Hope you will be able to describe when it would be appropriate to request additional services. And we hope you'll have a background in facilitating fee negotiation conversations with an architect. So thank you for joining us today. That's the admin portion of the session out of the way, and I'm going to turn it over to Rosalind.
Thanks. And I'm gonna, let's see, remember how to stop sharing here. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna ask our 4 panelists. We have Jay Ryan Flynn here from Bala, Stephen Garvin from Samiotes. Hopefully I'm pronouncing everyone's companies right. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Carrie Havey from The Green Engineer, and Glenn Heinmiller from Lamb Partners. So I'm going to kind of kick things off here and ask you all to kind of introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about what disciplines your firms provide services for, what kind of projects you work on, and kind of generally like how you go about developing your fees. So I'll ask Jay to start off. That's all right. Just going down my list here.
Yep. So anyway, Jay Ryan Flynn, work for Bala Consulting Engineers. We're a full MEP, FP, IT, AV, security, and firm that does a lot of things: commissioning, energy modeling, pretty much almost anything under the sun involving MEP. Anyway, we do a lot of education work, K through 9. We're starting to get a little more of higher education work. We do transportation, corporate, pretty much everything in the MEP world except for healthcare. Yeah, and so sorry, there was a question in there too, right? It was about
how you generally
fees.
generally, how do you come up with the fee that's appropriate for the scope, right?
I mean, I think that's the toughest thing we deal with, because as we all know, of course, it's, oh, by the way, you've been awarded this project, or we're asking you to pursue this project with us. And by the way, I know you don't know much about the project, but can you give us a fee? So of course it's like, the fee's always first, and then you get into the project and you say, oh, okay, maybe our fee wasn't that great, or we didn't know about certain things in the project. But I mean, of course, the architects write beautiful RFPs, and which we do appreciate. But again, a lot of the times I think it's the fee always comes first, and then you get into the project, and then at that point we kind of have that moment of, oh, okay, we think the fee's okay, or oh, maybe it was a little light, and okay, we have to find very efficient ways of doing design of the project. So again, it's I think it's one of the toughest things we have to do on a weekly basis, try to figure out a fee. But it's something that we lean on past experiences and past projects and kind of other people in the office to kind of figure out what an acceptable fee is that an architect will be happy with and an owner will agree to.
Great. And Stephen, I'll hand it over to you next.
Sure. So I'm Steve Garvin, President and Principal of Samiotes Consultants. We're civil engineers, environmental permitting. We do land surveying and reality capture. We work all throughout, a lot in the in educational sectors, K through 12, upper higher education, public and private in both of those. Housing, a lot of public safety buildings, healthcare across the border. Big things we're trying to do when we're figuring out the fee is, what is the scale of the project? How big is the disturbance? Where is it occurring? Is it Boston? Is it Dayton? What's our experience working that municipality? What's our experience of working with that client or that architect, right? Some clients and architects might want more meetings, or we know that they will push things further along than others, and others would be a lighter touch. Whether that's good or bad to the final program, we understand hopefully from the history what that is. So we look at that, and really the biggest challenge for us is looking at permitting, butters, things of that nature. Who makes up the team? That's the civil engineer. We're going to look at who the landscape architect is. Are they doing grading? Are we doing grading? What part of layout? How does that scope? And to Jay's point, figuring out the scope is the biggest challenge when you just jump into a project. Often you get into it and then realize no one knew about this aspect. How do we cover it? Defining your scope is really, really important in that relationship. Really, with the prime, it is really important in their relationship with them. The one other thing I'll add, which is the newest component I think everyone deals with, is OPM, right? And who is the OPM? And I think that's a consideration we find more and more we circle into projects of fee and scope.
Great. And Carrie, could you introduce yourself next?
Sure. Carrie Havey with the Green Engineer. I'm a principal with the Green Engineer. We offer sustainable design consulting services and project management, as well as energy modeling. The sustainability rating systems we most frequently work with are LEED, WELL, FitWell. We do energy modeling for LEED, for code requirements, such as modeling to meet the new Mass Energy Code TEDI requirements, and as well as mass save incentives. And we also do WUFI models for passive house. Some of the other services we offer include net zero energy planning, meeting local codes. So that could be City of Boston, Article 37, City of Cambridge, Article 22. We do daylight modeling, and then whole building life cycle assessments are some of our other services. As far as fees goes, I'd say there's a couple of different factors we're thinking about when setting our fees. First is the project type. Is it a core and shell lab building versus is it a residential building? The project size, is it a small, we could do a small 10,000 square foot fit out, and we do projects up to say 400,000 multi-building residential. So obviously that scale is important. And then the project scope, is it LEED certification only? Is it certified or certifiable? Do they want an energy model? Is it integrated modeling throughout the project, or is it just a simple compliance model? Do we also need to meet the City of Boston Article 37 requirements? So typically we have kind of a base services if LEED consulting is included. And then we might provide energy modeling as an optional service because the MEP might also be providing that. So sometimes our proposals will have that as an optional service. And then we might have some additional ad services such as daylight modeling or doing an LCA. And then I guess a couple of things to note too for our LEED certification, our fees do not vary based on the certification level. It's the same for LEED Silver versus LEED Gold. But we do change we charge the same fee if a project's brought in later versus if we're brought in later versus if we're starting in SD. It's really the same amount of fee, same amount of work that we have for meeting those requirements. Yeah, and then I guess just lastly on the energy modeling side, you know, our scope can vary from doing a simple compliance model to multiple, looking at multiple design alternatives and looking at different system options to assess what the most energy and cost efficient solution would be for that project.
Great. Thanks, that's helpful. And then I think last we have Glenn here. You want to jump in?
Hi. Yeah, Glenn Heinmiller, principal at Land Partners. Land Partners, for those of you who don't know, is an architectural lighting design firm. We work all across the United States and some international work. And we design lighting for, if you can think of a project type, we design lighting for it. Interior lighting, exterior lighting, day lighting, every project type. We're 33 team members now, 4 offices, 7 geographic locations. And actually I counted, I think, from 6 different countries.
Wow.
So which is kind of made us it's pretty cool, actually. So fees. The way we look at fees is we basically first look at the project type, because that's going to tell us pretty much everything. We know what the project, and that's because we've been in business for over 60 years. We do between 100 and 150 projects a year, and we track our time on our projects like really obsessively. So we have a huge database of information about what it took to do certain types of projects and just all that experience. So if you look at a project type, you say that, well, we kind of know what the fee is going to be. Well, yeah, but then what are the modifiers? And obviously the big one is what's the physical size of the project? And some types of projects that matters. You know, a 200,000 square foot fit out is obviously going to be a bigger fee than 20,000 square foot fit out. Another one, you know, lead project. You know, that's the first thing we can. Is it going to be lead because, and how do you want us to be involved? Extent of exterior lighting. If it's a new construction project or whatever, what's the extent of this exterior lighting? And are we doing it? Also related is that parking and underground parking. Sometimes we do it, sometimes we not. You know, we need to know whether we're going to be responsible for that. Back of house. And then of course, this is sort of referred to by, I think, Steve, you know, who's the architect? And that's, you know, some need more intensive design services than others. And that's not a good thing or bad thing. It's just, it's the reality. And so, you know, most of our work is repeat work. So we have a pretty good idea of what a particular architect needs. And that's definitely going to affect our fee. And then also who's the owner. That doesn't, I mean, I'll always just say there are some institutional clients who we found to be pretty needy. So I won't name any names. Anyhow,
Right.
And then the other one that has actually caught me like a couple of times is renovation versus new construction. Because if it's complicated building, especially an old building, the renovation, you know, the interior work, our fee could be up to double what it would be if it was new construction. Yeah. So, and then of course you have things like, you know, we do look at, sometimes we look at construction costs, sometimes we look at, you know, we do an estimate of like how many hours it's going to be, but those are kind of just cross checks usually. But you know, I mean, for us, the key, and this is also referred to as like understanding what the scope really is, what is really required of us, and then making sure the architect understands what exactly the services we're proposing. And if you understand each other's expectations, then, you know, then your fee is probably going to be right on. And yeah.
Interesting. Sounds like across the board, having a clear understanding of the scope is definitely key. And I think it's easy for the architects to kind of forget that you aren't always part of some of the pre-meetings, the very first stages, right? So you don't get maybe all the background that we have when thinking about this, which is, I think, a good thing maybe for us all to keep in mind when we're asking for proposals from you, right? And I wonder, a couple of you kind of mentioned, and I think Stephen, maybe you in particular said, often as you get more into it, there are more like, oh, we didn't realize that was part of this, or we didn't, you know, like kind of things that you uncover as part of the scope as you dig in more. And I wonder, is that more often, the more you learn, the more you realize, oh, you should have accounted for more fee, or it's ever go the other way around? I don't know.
One thing I'll say from a permit perspective, right? Sometimes we'll try to capture everything and you don't know if something might trigger it or not. So there are definitely phases or tasks that we say, well, we won't need that. So that was in the fee. That won't be triggered from our perspective.
Yeah.
But not much else, right? Everything is just like Glenn was talking about for, you know, a renovation. When you're doing work and it's under the ground, you usually tend to find more than less.
Yeah, right. Unexpected surprises.
And I also feel that like sometimes our exclusions grow in our proposal, where it's like, oh no, we didn't realize that last time. So by the way, we can't do this without an additional service.
Yes, I hear you. Yes. The list of assumptions and exclusions seems to grow the more you work on a project or in a building or with a certain client, right? And you get to know, like,
yeah, or at least
make it,
or at least we try to make it clear, like it's not like, hey, if you want us to include it, that's fine. We'll revise the number, but
Right,
Right now,
exactly.
it's not, right now, it's, not
The
included.
assumption is, yeah, right,
Absolutely.
exactly. So one of the things we wanted to get into with all of you is how the project schedule impacts your scope and fees. I could see for the different disciplines, it may impact you differently, right? I think we've all been on projects where, it's gone from 6 months to 9 months, or maybe it's gone to a whole year, right? How does that impact how you would calculate your fees, or yeah.
We usually figure a certain amount of time needs to be spent on a project every month or every week, depending on how long it's going on. If it goes
Yeah.
longer, we assume that there's going to be more interaction with the design team and the owner, right? And that also gives the owner more time to change their mind or ask different questions that will keep a certain amount of work. So longer tends to be more, unless it's a real fast track, which I don't think it's these days, but somebody needs something, you need to cut everything else out because they need to get something out in maybe an unreasonable amount of time, and there's a cost associated with that. So those are the ways it impacts us.
Yeah, right. It kind of goes both ways. We kind of talked about this at the last session too, where it's like you have that sweet spot of like, this is about how long it takes to do the thing, and this is the cost. If you really want to speed it up, it's probably going to cost you more. And if you really stretch it out, it's also going to impact the cost, right? Yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I would,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Okay, so I mean, in our proposal, we put a schedule in there, and that's basically, this is a schedule we're committing to. And so technically, if it changes, that technically gives us the right to ask for additional service. But reality is that's, I would say projects, the schedule doesn't change or are the exception by far. Probably 90% of the projects we work on, the schedule doesn't end up being what's in our proposal. And the thing is, schedule slips for us don't necessarily mean more work. It's just spreading the work out over more time. But what they can mean is that it's more time for the architect or the owner to have more time to design and redesign and redesign. So it can't mean more for us. And the other thing is, like, and this is hard to put a number on, but schedule changes. We have so many projects going on with relatively small office compared to architecture firms. Like schedule changes wreak havoc on our overall productivity because we allocate people. I mean, it's true for the architects too, but for us, I think it's especially bad because any one of our team members is probably working on 5 or 10 active projects at any one time. So, allocating their time. And so once one project goes on hold for 2 months, it's like, oh crap, so, but how do we charge for that? I don't know. We don't, I guess. It's just reality.
Yeah, right. I feel like that's like the staffing challenge conundrum, probably for all of us, right? To a certain degree. It's just like the unpredictability of the schedules and things getting delayed or pushed back. And I feel like you reach a certain point where it's like, at least I feel this is like trying to predict the staffing is like, you can only predict so much, right? It's just your best guess and count on things changing, right? Jay, you're about to say something too.
Oh yeah, so I guess to Glenn's point, yeah, we usually commit to a certain schedule within our proposal. But I guess there's almost like, I see this maybe 2 different buckets here. It's like, okay, well, schedule changes in design, which if they get pushed out, sometimes we welcome. And then there's, schedule changes in construction. Whereas, if we're being asked to commit to, site visits every month and then, being on, weekly, calls with the owner, we could see, if they say, okay, the job's pushing out 3 months, then we'll go back and we'll say, okay, well, if we're committed to these things on a monthly or weekly basis, then, we should be entitled to, a little bit of, additional service. But then again, if we're not committed to those things and we can just kind of push a little bit, then we wouldn't necessarily be, looking for additional services for push and schedule.
Yeah, similar for us. Changes in the schedule during design impacts us more than in construction. In design, it means more meetings. If there's changes to the design, it can impact the lead and the scorecard. It can impact the energy model if there's changes to the mechanical systems. So that can all drag on and take more time. Construction for us is a bit of a lighter lift. So we don't see as many issues if construction drags on a little bit longer with that impacting our scope and fees.
makes sense. Let's see. And so this is actually kind of a good segue into, aside from schedule changes, what other, I don't know, situations or typical things that you run into that bring up additional services for you guys, or like would cause you to ask for additional services?
Well, I mean, they're the obvious ones, like an obvious change in scope, or and addition of more space to the project, or whatever it might be. And when those are coming from the owner, then that's sort of like easy, because the architect's probably getting additional money too. The problem is when things that aren't really in our scope, that are caused by the architect or whatever. I mean, not caused, but I mean,
I understand what you're saying. It's okay.
I mean,
Sometimes we change our minds.
Well, I mean, those are the messy ones, what I call the messy ones, where you can kind of have the conversation about, like, this is really outside of our scope, Madam Architect, and then Madam Architect is gonna say, well, yeah, but we're not getting more money for this, so like, you signed on, and that's basically the reality of it. I think the solution to that problem, to be honest, is to have I mean, our fees are 99% lump sum fees, so to have a fee that's proper for the project. And so then when those little things, I mean, it's happening to me right now on a big project, and it's actually owner cost, but the owner is never going to pay for it. And it's probably another 10 hours of time to deal with this and during construction. But the project, we have a appropriate fee for the project, so we just take care of that, and we don't have to have that awkward. It's when you get, to be honest, it's when you get beaten down on your fee at the beginning, then when push comes to shove, then you really feel like, no, I need more money, and then you have to have those awkward conversations, and we avoid them. I mean, my point is, if you negotiate a proper fee, then you never have to have those conversations, at least.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if that's really clear what I'm saying, but
I see, because I think we experienced the same on projects. I'll say is
I
like,
mean, the ones that typically get us are like redesign after issuing CDs, which is clearly like, but then sometimes, value engineering after CDs are issued, those are things where we really, those are the things that happen frequently that cause us to raise our hands.
yeah. About anyone else here? Stephen, I see you're unmuted.
Add on to what
Yeah.
say, I think, again, clear change of scope, right? They added a parcel, or the building is now going to have a bigger size to it, or a smaller size to it, right? Or we need to fix this parking, or the neighbors have this issue. It comes into play, or a permit no one expected, right? It's trickier when you come back of, say, you're kind of skipping back phases, you going from basic CDs, maybe back to conceptual or schematic, right? That's a bigger jump. If it maybe goes from our perspective to DD and we're tweaking something, that's fine. Again, in the beginning, we're talking about understanding who you're working with as a team, right? Certain teams are going to maybe want to go back and forth more often, or understand, you understand that they will do that. Other teams won't do it as much, and then you have that expectation, and you hope that there's the experience and relationship where if something changes and that's not how you normally work as a team, then this would not be expected by the consultant, or the consultant should have expected, right? And I think that's a key part for us. We tend to start to say, this is identified addition, and then hope you have a conversation of, we'll go so far, but if it gets to be too much, that really is not within our budget. As Glenn said, it's easier if it's set where you have built in expecting that nothing's going to go smoothly. If you think that employees first time they're doing a project. So we always expect some things to go sideways and try and put that in our budget. If it gets pulled down to a budget that has to be perfect, well, then you're going to be going back and asking for ad services.
Yeah.
And I was going to say,
Go ahead.
like other times, I think people, maybe the owner or maybe the client, maybe might not know it's an additional service on our end or additional fee until we have the conversation. Oh, by the way, what you're asking for is, gonna throw us into a little bit of redesign here. And it's that point to have the conversation where I know in the past we've done this. We'll say, okay, this is the first time is okay, we'll do it. Like we understand. Fine. It's not that much on our end to do. But then it seems like if it's a repeat, then we have to really put our hand up and say, by the way, we did a couple for free, and now we actually want to be able to, collect additional services for the next one or the next couple you're going to ask for.
Right. That makes sense.
I think that the other thing that prevents additional services is back to what we were saying before, a clear understanding of the scope of services that we're actually proposing to provide. And I would just urge all the architects on this call is like, we do a pretty detailed proposal. I mean, I think it's relatively detailed. And so I just ask all the architects, please read our proposal. And you will see that it says we're going to do 5 site visits or something. It'll see that it says we're going to support 50%, interim phase milestone, or it says, and if you don't like that, and I've had this happen I've had architects say, no, we're going to need more. So put in more. It's like, okay, fine, and then everybody understands. And so then, yeah, so.
Yeah. I love a detailed proposal, gotta say. I wish everyone, because for the same reason you say, it's make sure everyone's on the same page about what services are getting provided and what everyone expects.
Well, the other thing we
is
find
helpful.
is like that the person who's agreeing to our fee, the principal at the firm or something, is not the person running the project. And
Mhm.
a lot of times it seems like the PM or and the design architect don't know what's in our proposal. And so they start asking for stuff. They start asking for stuff that maybe we didn't say we provide, so. I think it's also good to communicate to your team what your consultant's scope really is.
That is a good point. Usually there's
And also,
like one
the other thing is
person
make sure
reviewing the
that like there
proposal.
is an overlap or gap. We've had this happen where, the architect expects we're going to do something that we think the architect is going to be doing, or also especially with MEP, I'm sure that Ball has run into this where, they may assume that the lighting designer is doing something, and we may assume they're doing it, and it's really uncomfortable if there's a gap, because it puts the architect in a really bad position because they got nobody providing this service. And once again, read the proposals that are coming from your MEP firm and your lighting designer and your civil engineer, whatever, and make sure that everything's covered for the project.
Yeah, I know, Stephen, you mentioned some things like that with the landscape designer too as well. And I think of like energy modeling between sustainability and mechanical MEP as well.
The
can
more
often be.
we try and learn from that, I think what Ben said, and then you start, and I think Jay started saying this too, like, your proposals grow because you have that experience. Say, oh boy, how do we not have that happen again? What do we look forward to?
Right. So when you say assumption, someone else is doing the energy modeling or whatever, like sometimes that's like the little indicator.
The other challenge is timing. We definitely always will say this is out of scope, whether it's additional services or not. We want to identify right away it's out of scope. We want to make sure our project managers, like I was saying, have the proposal and it's all available, because if they don't understand that, also sometimes it gets up to the principal level, and at that point it's kind of too late. So just like the project managers on the architect side may not understand the negotiation, we want to make sure our project.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'll just add, since we're not designing, we don't see a lot of additional services needed on that angle, but the results of that additional those design changes can impact us. So we might have to redo documentation that we did, or we might have to redo an energy model. And so that's typically the time where we would need ad services. I'll also say, like, RFPs for sustainability are often, that's the most convoluted part of RFPs often, is they just say lead. And a lot of times clients don't really know what they want early on. So it's challenging sometimes to navigate what the scope of services should include when we're going on kind of very little information from the client, and sometimes a misunderstanding of some of, the aspects of sustainability and lead, and, what version and such. So there's a little interpretation that sometimes needs to happen.
Yeah. Sense. And actually, we should open it up to the whole group. We should have said this at the beginning, that anyone is welcome to kind of chime in and ask questions. So maybe I'll kind of open it up. We're kind of about halfway through here. Anyone on the call have any questions that have come up for them while we're discussing, or anything they had in mind before joining the session that they wanted to know from the consultant side, developing fees?
I'll ask a quick question. Stephen,
Yeah.
you mentioned briefly in your introduction the impact of the OPM. Can you expand on that a little?
Sure, and I don't know how it affects some of the other professions, but as a civil engineer with environmental permitting, the OPM is going to be the representative office of the client when we're going to meet with the state or the municipality, and they might have a certain perspective on how quickly something's going to be done, whether it's reasonable or not, or supporting us as a team as to, where you want to take a stand on something, right? So understanding the OPM is key, and then certain OPMs understand the scope better from a site or architectural perspective, and we'll be able to guide the owner better as to what might be in scope or out of scope. So we find having OPMs that understand that well and communicate that well to the client helps the overall relationship with the team with the client.
And I was going to say, we've had, usually not on medium to large projects, but on smaller projects, because the OPM wasn't part of the whole fee negotiation. We've had times before where the OPM, we've had to bring our fee up to the OPM because they've been asking for things that we didn't necessarily own. Where, and we have to remind them, or remind our client to remind them that, hey, listen, we don't necessarily, own what they're asking for. Yes, we can do it, but it's not in our proposal, and it's not in our scope of work.
Right.
So not that happens too often, but I feel like on smaller jobs, we get more into it.
Yeah.
Where the OPM will take a larger role in, what they need or what they want or what they expect.
Yeah. I see we got a message in the chat here. Someone's having trouble with their mic, but a question for the architects. What percentage of our projects do you bring in a lighting designer? And for the projects you don't, who takes on the scope? Internal, electrical engineer, rep help, etc. So for the architects, I guess, I'm trying to think for myself, since I've been mostly working on the same project for the last few years, so not a great sample size, but we don't have a lighting designer on it. It's a run office space and like infrastructure upgrades kind of project. Mostly the lighting is existing to remain. But there was a part of it that where we were going to be kind of redesigning the lighting, and it was kind of internal and with some rep help, but the scope was relatively small. So that's my short answer while everyone else was thinking.
I was going to say, if I could chime in.
Yeah.
I think more and more we have architects asking us to own the lighting design in our proposal and the MEP proposal. Whereas, before 5-10 years ago, it was always a separate consultant, and nope, the architect will, hire them, and that's a separate entity. But it seems like more and more they're asking us to do it, so we have to, hire an outside firm to actually do it, because, on large projects, it's just we don't have the we don't have the capacity always, or just the know-how in order to do it. Where I guess like a couple MEP firms do, but we by chance do not. So I think that's kind of a struggle on our end a little bit, where now we have to go out and find somebody else and carry them as a sub-consultant to us to be able to do the lighting design.
From HMFH's standpoint, we typically our electrical engineers do majority of it, but if we have specialized lighting, sometimes we'll bring a consultant on. we don't really have a percentage in mind. We kind of just try to define the scope as best as can. I know that's always difficult. That's what everyone's challenge is, but you know, the more specialized the problem, I guess, the easier it is to define the scope. And then we kind of just see if it fits within the overall scheme of the fee and go from there.
Great, thanks. Anyone else have anything to add? Oh, she wants to know what specialized means.
Especially, I
Understandable.
mean, we always bring in for like sometimes maybe a theater lighting consultant. They got a recent JQS project. We brought in theater projects, and I think they did the lighting for that. Sometimes there might be common spaces. You know, we have like community spaces that need more attention to the way they're going to be lit. So we might bring in for that. So just spaces that aren't maybe like classrooms, you know, typical spaces that we've done millions of times, and we understand how to calculate the foot candle and look at the different things, or back of the house utility we'll do on our own too. So
Great, thanks. Anyone else want to add to that? I had another question. This is a little bit of like my personal, for my own personal benefit. I'm sure a lot of people have been, I think especially on public work, for example, on studies where there's a fixed fee, you know, the scope is set, the fee is preset before they even select the design team, right? And my experience, it seems like those fees are tighter than for anyone's comfort, right? And I think I've found myself in several situations where we solicit proposals from all the consultants, and the consultant proposals total the total fee, right? And like we would then like the architect has almost nothing or nothing left. And you know, there have been some times where we've ended up in a situation where we kind of have had to like dictate, like, if someone's going to get this percentage, someone's going to get this percentage, and we have to, if we're going to do this project, it's going to have to be for these fees. And I'm curious, from the consultant perspective, is that helpful? I feel like sometimes we go down this rabbit hole of, hey, could you shave down your fee a little bit more? Can you, like, it needs to be lower. And maybe we kind of, as architects, beat around the bush too much, and maybe that's not helpful. I don't know. I'm curious if you all have found yourselves in kind of situations like this, and I don't know, what's the best way to kind of work with you guys on getting the fee and the scope aligned on things like that, where we don't have any leverage to negotiate the total fee with the client.
I would say, if I could jump in,
Yeah.
I would say, you know, especially on public projects, I mean, our firm, we expect to lose money on ST. On DD, we expect to, you know, lose only a lot less money, but still lose money, and then try to make it up in CD. I mean, it's just, it seems like we do, like we go into this knowing that, you know, what schematic design of the project is very important to get scope out there, to agree on systems and everything else. And we say, okay, we're going to go over the hours, but yes, we're going to lose money, but eventually we should make it up. Yeah, it's expected that the fee is not going to match, you know, the scope that we have to provide.
Yeah.
And so along those lines, you know, we do a lot of MSBA type projects in module 3 and 4. You're doing feasibility, schematic. We look at it as a loss leader, right? It's marketing, hoping to get the project that gets approved in the town, right? Do we hear from, we set a fee and we will tell the architect, this is based on our experience of doing 50 MSBA projects in the last 5 to 10 years, and what it will take for that type of school. Is it an elementary school, a middle school, a high school? But sometimes the architect will say, this is what I have. And then we will hopefully look, if it is a reduction, to say, okay, we're going to reduce the number of meetings, or what can we do to reduce the scope so that it's aligned with what we're already hoping to not make and lose and not lose more. But again, that's relationship based too. And often there's a leap of faith that the project will get approved and move forward, right? If you're taking that into account. So.
I would, yeah, it's relationship based. I mean, we've had a lot of experience, especially not necessarily public work but are really small projects And if it's, you know, and I just had this happen, actually, a very, very major client of ours, you know, called me and said, listen, we got this little renovation project. I mean, literally 1 room, 2 rooms. And doing it, they were doing it for a very important client of theirs, right? And say, can you help us out on this? I don't have any money. Can you just give me some help? And we say, absolutely, no problem. I mean, it wasn't like for free, but it was just, it wasn't like, you know, a real fee. And you know, because we have a relationship with them and we're helping them. We see it as business development, basically, you know, expense, whatever. And the other same thing is if it's like a study and or a competition and we're going in and like, you know, we'll you know, kind of get on board and do some work sort of if maybe for free or at cost. I shouldn't say for free, but we never work for free, but to help the effort. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a good point to
Similar
kind of,
to,
oh, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, similar to what Stephen and Glenn just said, we have been in instances where there's a small project and either the client or architect is saying, hey, we have this really small project. No, it's like not the typical size of the projects we work with you, but can we still team up on this? And so, you know, we're always very open to talking about it, and especially if it's an architect we love or a client we love, we want to try to make it work. And so it might be a matter of trying to trimming down our services. So like maybe it's not full Revit, maybe it's just PDF markups, or maybe instead of like several iterations of one particular space, maybe it's only 2 or something, or maybe it's not reviewing the submittals 3 times, maybe it's only once or something, but just trying to just, you know, make it work for everybody.
Yeah, it's a good point. I feel like I'm hearing there's a lot in general. Seems like there's a lot to like the relationships between everyone. Your experience with different architects and clients and owners really
For sure.
makes a
Yeah,
difference.
and you
Yeah.
know, it's like long-term relationships where it's not, so we'll, you know, we're going to help out on this one. But then the big project comes along and that architect that they take care of us. They make sure, you know, they make sure we get an appropriate fee on that project. And I just, those relationships are really great. Which you're basically helping each other out. I mean,
Right.
and you were talking before about like schedule changes and additional services. I've had projects where I was big projects, or one was like told the project got delayed for 6 months and the client was goofing around, and I just got an email and said, we've just increased your fee by X, because they told the client their fee was going up too because they had to like redo some stuff and everything. I was like, okay, you're taking care of people, you know, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
They didn't
Yeah.
have to do that, you know.
Yep. Well, good to know those things are appreciated. I feel like it's a two-way street, right? Like everyone takes care of each other and we can all do great projects, right?
Well, and that's what you look for. If it's a 2-way street, you want to keep working with those partners, right?
Yeah.
If it's a 1-way street, time and again, you start to say, this isn't someone that we're going to budge on fee as much with.
Yeah, right. I'm just thinking of like even personal experience, like with MEP engineer, it's like it's same thing. Like you take good care of them, and then it's like when you have the thing I need tomorrow, I'm sorry, I know this is really inconvenient, but can you get it to me tomorrow? And then, you know, they're more likely to pull through for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the other thing is like, I guess the title of this whole thing was negotiation, and I was thinking
Yeah.
about that. It's like we don't really have to negotiate very much, and I think the one place where it's happened is public work, where the architects negotiating their fees, and you know, I'm sure this has happened to all the other consultants on this project. They come back and say, hey, everybody's got to cut their fee by 5% or 10%. Okay, you do that. But in general, we don't have to, and I think that's because we know how to set an appropriate fee, and our clients who work with us before understand what an appropriate fee is. And you know, the only time we get into negotiation is on the additional services stuff. And like I said before, is, I mean, this is self-serving to say to the architects, but you know, make sure that your consultants have an appropriate fee, because if you don't, you're going to have all these awkward conversations about additional services that you don't want to have, I don't want to have, and in the end, you know what? The fee will end up being the same, right? So maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, you know, I had a principal at a very prestigious firm tell me once when we were putting our proposal together, he said, make sure your fee is high enough so you never have to come back and ask for more money. And I said, you
Yeah.
know, because
And
it just, you know, he knew that he knew, you know, he was basically saying, you know what you're going to need to do for us.
mhm.
So put in the
Just tell
appropriate
us what it
fee.
is. Yeah.
And yeah,
Right.
and yeah,
Yeah, and I think that probably depends some on the client you're working with too, right? Some it's
absolutely.
like you know, like we said, some public clients, like the fee is the fee, period, end of story, and you have to make it work. And like I think Jay, you were saying, like you just accept the fact that the beginning you're gonna lose money on it and hopefully make it up later, right?
And that's, yeah, because it's only, you're right, it's only so much money is allotted at a certain design phase. And it's like you can
Yeah.
kick and scream and be unhappy about it, but it's not going to change because the
Yeah.
architect you're only getting a percentage of the architect's fee.
Yep.
And
Right.
that's,
Right.
they're not going to give you their fee. They can say, no, you got to deal with the fee that you have.
Yeah.
And I guess
Yeah.
I've always wanted this, and I guess I'll ask now, with all these architects on the line. I'm just, I mean, I'm just curious, like when it comes to like with pretty much, you know, all the projects, you have multiple consultants, probably proposals from multiple consultants. I mean, what goes into choosing a consultant? Like if you had 3 MEP firms, if you had, you know, I don't know, 3 structural firms, whatever. I mean, is it always like who's willing to do the job for the lowest fee, or does it come down to relationships, or is it something in between?
I can, yeah,
Yeah,
you can
sure.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Bobby.
I would
Oh,
say we definitely are mostly relationship based, and we honestly don't solicit multiple fees very often from different consultants. We kind of pick our teams that we go into projects with, and we put them on a proposal. So we do a lot of public work too. So a lot of times we have to provide most of the consultants, not all of them, but our primary consultants. So we don't solicit multiple fees. But as Steve knows, so we worked with him several times, that, you know, when you do go in the feasibility study, everyone's taking a loss. And then when you know you're going to make it up, you say, when you give me your next fee for the second part, make sure you make up your loss as part of your fee. And that's always kind of how we like to play it. And then we always carry a consultant contingency in our fee as well, so that we don't have to go back to the owner if it's one of those in between where it's like, we don't really want to ask the owner for additional money, but at the same time, it's not such a large amount that it's going to hurt us, you know, with our fees. So we try to put a little bit in a pot for that for each project, for those, to avoid those awkward conversations. But ultimately, if it's large enough, we will go back to the owner and say, well, and try to defend you guys as much as possible, but we're not always successful, which is the problem.
yeah. I think similar for us in our office. Most times we're picking our consultants based on relationships and past shared experience and who's the best, gonna help us win the work often, right? Like your experience matches up with the project and our experience and what, you know, all those things. I think the only time we really solicit multiple proposals for scope is sometimes like for additional services that are for services that weren't already on the project. So like if all of a sudden we need a lighting designer and they were not part of our team, like on public work, sometimes you have to solicit 3, right? And then even then we select based on, yes, the fee, but also again, experience with them, their appropriateness for the work, that kind of thing. That's usually smaller little ad service things that have come up in my experience. Oh, there's something else I thought of that I wanted to say. And now I forget.
Well, these are some great trade secrets. I'm surprised that it's a good thing there's nobody listening.
Well, but I mean, I guess like Bobby, I think at least my experience recently has been all very public work where, you know, again, the fee is pretty fixed. So like, and there's maybe this is revealing trade secrets, but there, you know, like there are certain percentages that roughly we think MEP is going to be certain percent in a range of a percent of the fee. And, you know, kind of broke cost will be such and such percent and things like that give us a ballpark.
Yeah, and that's always a question in our minds where we're always like, oh, how come they didn't pick us? Did we do something wrong? Did we, you know, was our fee too high?
You slot in for different disciplines that you kind of know it's going to be in this range.
Yeah.
You just have to be able to put your whole proposal together or say, okay,
Yep.
so then you're looking for it to fall within. And I presume if it's way over or under, you want to make sure at that point, because under's a problem too later. Hey, are we on both sides looking at the right scope, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Then want to go back to your consultants and make sure if it's out of that range, what's being missed on the scope on both sides.
Yep.
I think we also like to go in with everyone's first proposal before we ask people to cut, to see what the owner will, if they'll accept it. And then if they
Right.
will, and everything is great. If they don't, then we have to start to look more closely at individual to see, you know, are you compared to similar projects, is your fee similar to what we received on a past project? You know, I think that always comes into play too. We have a whole database of all our projects and percentages of what fees were, and then we can go and say, oh, that was a little bit more difficult for MEP because we did X, Y, and Z. Maybe that's why this fee is more or less. And so,
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
but that's usually hopefully only if fees don't get approved, that we have to start to really get into it like that.
I guess another question, I guess, for the consultants from my end is, you know, are there any things that, again, if we're looking at, we have to bring your fee down, it's just got to fit in the overall, right? What are the levers that you can pull that have the biggest impact? Is it like not including you in every meeting? Is it, I don't know, limiting something else? Like maybe it's probably different for each of you a little bit. I'm curious if there's anything you could pinpoint that would be like the
I would
biggest
say
impact.
limiting meetings,
Yeah.
and then site visits. Yeah, site visits. And that's probably the biggest thing. I mean, not that you're shaving, you know, a heck of a lot off, but every penny counts on some of these projects. I mean, that's the biggest thing. We say, okay, instead of committing to a site visit, you know, to review, observe field conditions, it's like, oh, okay, instead of once every 3 weeks, we'll go once every 5 weeks or once every month.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, okay, we're not committing to being on, you know, any weekly meetings with the, you know, with the owner.
Just like as needed, maybe, or.
Yeah, exactly. If something comes up, we'll be happy to be on, but we can't commit to it every week.
Yeah, right. I see Sarah added to the chat, not requiring a 3-name specification for lighting. You're talking about like 3 equals for each. Yeah. For non-public, yeah, right. It's required for public work, but yep.
I mean, our answer is like, okay, what scope are we going to cut? You know, I mean, that's our starting answer. And the things, I mean, meetings aren't such a big deal for us, but like schematic, like don't have us involved in SD. You know, because I mean, we generally, depending on the project, we generally don't have a lot of involvement in SD anyhow, but you know, there's a way to just like, because sometimes there's a lot of wheel spinning happening, and you know, you get sucked into stuff and that they don't really need the lighting designer involved with. The other thing is, you know, scope areas, right? Like, okay, well, don't have us do the underground parking. Don't have us do, I don't know, some part of the project, you know. We don't like that, you know, the architect doesn't like that either, but, you know. The one thing we try to avoid getting cut is CA, because not that, you know, we don't usually offer to cut CA. We might cut it down to saying no site visits or something like that. But it's really short-sighted to not have the lighting designer involved in CA, because I mean, and we want to be involved because we want to see the project, you know, come out right. But
yeah, right.
I have a quick question too, actually, if possible. You know, COVID has turned basically all of our consulting meetings into virtual. Have you guys have you seen, you know, not having to come to the architect's office to do coordination meetings as being more or less time? Because it seems like we have more meetings now, even though they're not at our office. But do you think it's been kind of fair in terms of
improves the communication? It's well worth it, because you don't have to drive in to have that communication and be involved in the conversation. If it's a meeting every week and you're sitting on the call when there's conversations about other disciplines for 45 minutes, that feels like a waste, but at least maybe you can, shockingly enough, turn off your camera and do other things at that point. Also, where you can't do it in a meeting, right? You always felt bad in a meeting looking down at your phone when you're listening to them talk about HVAC for 45 minutes, which is Jay, but you know, I don't really love that. the other item I would say from a reduced scope perspective is submissions, right? If all of a sudden we're not doing a 25, a 50, and a 100%, but we just do a 50%, that's a way to have less work and you hope to coordinate the same amount, but there's less iterations, and that's a way to cut scope down and help with fee too.
And I would say the silver lining to come out of COVID, if there is one, is that so many meetings are on Teams now, where I just think it's so valuable to even, weekly meetings with clients, just to, all get on, we have our cameras on, so we all know what each other look like. And but just to be able to say, oh, well, do you have a cut sheet for that? Yes, I do. Let me pull it up on the screen. Oh, what about, you can just, let me go online. I'll show you what this looks like. Whereas when you're in a conference room, you can't always do that. Or you weren't able to do that, 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that's just, I think it's almost better now because I think it's more interactive.
Yeah. Bobby, it's a great question. And we talk about it all the time. Actually, I was having a conversation with one of my partners last evening as I was leaving about this exact question, and certainly, I mean, one thing is we were doing virtual meetings before COVID, even with our local clients, because it allowed us to have more, sort of what has been said before, more frequent interaction. Instead of waiting for the next meeting to schedule 2 weeks from now, we could have a 30-minute call and get some design things progress. So we were already doing it. So when COVID hit, it was like, no problem. What it does say, it's huge for productivity because for us, we're out in North Cambridge. Most of our clients are downtown Boston. So it's at least an hour of time that we don't have to spend now getting back and forth. And really, in reality, it's more like 2 hours because if you go into somebody's office, there's a certain amount of schmooze time and stuff. What I miss about it, though, is back to the relationship building thing. I mean, that was very valuable to me, to be in people's offices, be in our clients' offices, and have that time to build relationships. And so that's been a loss. But as far as overall productivity, I think it's been a positive thing. Yeah.
Good question. All right, I know we're bumping right up to 1. Anyone else have any final questions? We can kind of wrap. I think it was a really great conversation. This was definitely helpful for me, maybe helpful for the consultants too, even though you were our panelists. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining today. And stay tuned for our next PM Roundtable sessions. Thanks, Alexandra, for organizing, and our panelists for joining, and everyone for chiming in on the conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
All right, bye.